not only the most efficacious one, but the most efficacious for the amount of money that you're spending on it, unless you're getting sponsored, and then it's no real issue, of course. Vigorous Steve here. Let's discuss running growth hormone for 5 days on and 2 days off. For what, you might ask? And yes, it's the same question that I asked myself when I read this protocol on the old steroid forums over a decade ago, but somehow the protocol still persists. So let's discuss that in this video. But before we get into it, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm. All comments are appreciated, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Now, the main reason why this protocol was designed was ideally for budget purposes, and then people tried to find reasons why to run growth hormone for 5 days on and 2 days off, and started diving into the Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Somatotropic-Axis. That exogenous growth hormone downregulates natural growth hormone secretion in the same fashion that exogenous testosterone downregulates testosterone secretion or testosterone production in the testicles. Now keep in mind, there's a huge difference between the active life between exogenous testosterone being esterified and being injected in a depot that might take weeks to clear. Weeks, guys. Takes weeks to clear testosterone enanthate depending on the carrier oil and the injection site. Whereas exogenous growth hormone might be metabolized within 4 to 4.5 hours, especially if it's injected intramuscularly. And through a subcutaneous administration, it remains in the depot a little bit longer, resulting in an active life of about 4.5 hours. Now, that doesn't mean that growth hormone secretion afterwards is blunted, even though I will say that there are several studies showing that growth hormone secretion is blunted to a certain extent. That's not from the actual growth hormone itself, the exogenous growth hormone, but it's from the increase in insulin-like growth factor 1, which stays elevated for about 24 to 36 hours afterwards. And that's one of the downregulating or negative feedback systems. When IGF-1 levels are high, growth hormone is not really secreted from the pituitary gland because there's sufficient amounts in the bloodstream. Let's discuss the Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Somatotropic-Axis first, so we have a little bit of a biological understanding of what's going on when growth hormone is secreted and what stimulates it. The hypothalamus releases growth hormone releasing hormone, which signals the pituitary to release growth hormone. A compounding hormone, or look at it as a co-secretor, ghrelin, increases the rate at which growth hormone is released in the presence of growth hormone releasing hormone. So you need 2 of these hormones to get the maximum amount of growth hormone release. Ghrelin is released by the gastrointestinal tract, especially in the stomach, as a response to hunger. So when your stomach is empty, all the food has been digested, ghrelin is released, which subsequently releases growth hormone from the pituitary gland, especially when growth hormone releasing hormone is also present, being secreted by the hypothalamus. So now you have 2 hormones that result in the highest growth hormone release. When you're full, when you've been eating, whether that's a protein source, a fat source, or a glucose source, or a combination of all 3, somatostatin is released from the gastrointestinal tract, which inhibits growth hormone release, which makes logical sense. Growth hormone raises glucose concentrations in the bloodstream by causing a little bit of lipolysis, which then raises serum glucose concentrations because the glycerol backbone, which stores body fat, these fatty acids, the medium, long, and short-chain triglycerides, this glycerol backbone gets converted into glucose through gluconeogenesis in the liver. So when you take growth hormone, not only do you increase free-form fatty acids within the bloodstream, you also increase glucose concentrations. And you don't want this to happen in the presence of foods which also increase triglyceride levels in the bloodstream and glucose concentrations in the bloodstream. So you don't want to send a double signal. This is why we don't take growth hormone with meals. We ideally take this in a fasted stomach. Same for the growth hormone secretagogues, because you're going to raise free-form fatty acid concentrations and glucose levels by raising growth hormone concentrations, which will make you acutely insulin resistant. Now, there's many different ways around that, but we'll discuss that a little bit later in this video. So ghrelin raises, the hunger hormone raises free-form fatty acids and glucose concentrations in the bloodstream indirectly because it promotes growth hormone secretion. And somatostatin does the opposite. It blunts growth hormone secretion, whether that's a growth hormone releasing hormone present or not. It overrides that signal from the hypothalamus to the pituitary because food will by itself raise triglyceride, free-form fatty acids, and glucose concentrations in the bloodstream as well. So you don't want this overlapping effect. So it's a very regulatory signal that happens within minutes of hunger or of eating. So this is the normal hypothalamic-Pituitary-Somatotropic-Axis. Then, of course, when growth hormone concentrations are increased in the bloodstream, the liver starts releasing more insulin-like growth factor 1. And then the IGF-1 subsequently improves nutrient partitioning and nutrient uptake into skeletal muscle and takes care of some of the elevated triglycerides, free-form fatty acids, and the elevated blood glucose levels, keeping everything nicely balanced for glucose homeostasis and normal serum triglyceride levels. Again, IGF-1 stays elevated for about 24 to 36 hours after a growth hormone pulse, and this is the longest lasting hormone, which then also inhibits a little bit of additional growth hormone release because the IGF-1 is actively helping with nutrient partitioning already. And there's only so much IGF-1 your body is going to need, unless you're a bodybuilder and you need a little bit more. Now, to mitigate or reduce the blunting effect, the negative feedback that elevated serum IGF-1 concentrations have on growth hormone secretion for the next 24 hours, is simply by going hungry, which is, of course, not sustainable. At one point, you're going to have to eat, but you'll see that in people that are fasting, that have very high ghrelin levels and very low somatostatin levels, which again blunts growth hormone secretion, is that growth hormone concentrations are generally their highest, even though IGF-1 levels are also generally their highest. So in fasted states, especially with prolonged fasting, you see that growth hormone levels and IGF-1 levels are generally higher. And then as soon as you eat after a prolonged fast or intermittent fasting, somatostatin is released, blunting additional growth hormone secretion because now you have an additional influx of triglycerides, free-form fatty acids, and glucose into the bloodstream. And you don't need additional growth hormone on top. Hopefully by the time IGF-1 levels are sufficiently increased, allowing you to deal with this influx of nutrients, improve nutrient partitioning, nutrient uptake, and again, result in glucose homeostasis in the bloodstream, on top of the insulin secretion which will occur. If you want to save money, you can do it the following way. Actually, there's two protocols that we're going to discuss. Let's say you want to do the 5 days on, 2 days off, right? For budget purposes, but you still want a little bit of growth hormone on those days. You can look into a growth hormone secretagogue on the 2 days that you're not taking exogenous growth hormone. Not because you want to keep the hypothalamic-Pituitary-Somatotropic-Axis going because you're afraid of downregulation by taking exogenous growth hormone. So let's assume that we're doing this for budgeting purposes because, again, during the week from Monday to Friday, you're running pharmaceutical grade growth hormone, and that's really digging into your finances, whether that's 2 units, 4 units, 8 units, whatever dose of growth hormone you're running, or you're trying to save a little bit of money by running Chinese generics, even though the quality is a little bit dubious and the water retention is a little bit too much, causing you to look into other pathways to mitigate some of this water retention, which adding more money to your overall drug bill. So again, a lot of variables to play with. So, easy scenario, Monday to Friday, you're running exogenous growth hormone at whatever dose you can afford. And for 2 days of the week, you want to stimulate a little bit of growth hormone secretion from the pituitary gland with a growth hormone secretagogue or a combination of growth hormone secretagogues that is a lot more financially doable. First, we have to make sure that there's a minimal negative feedback on the pituitary from taking exogenous growth hormone and having elevated IGF-1 concentrations in the bloodstream. So let's say you run growth hormone from Monday to Friday. Friday evening, you would take 500 milligrams of metformin before bed to reduce IGF-1 concentrations in the bloodstream. Right? IGF-1 is one of the negative feedbacks regarding growth hormone secretion. And if you want to get the most amount of growth hormone secretion over the weekend using a growth hormone secretagogue, you want to reduce your IGF-1 levels, being one of the factors of a negative feedback. The other one being somatostatin, which is released by eating. So every time you administer a growth hormone secretagogue, you want to do that in a fasted state, whether that's before bed or upon waking or before the workout. Again, growth hormone release causes a little bit of insulin resistance acutely by raising free-form fatty acids in the bloodstream, which then inhibit insulin receptor substrate 1, making your insulin receptors less responsive to insulin. So you want to take either the growth hormone or a growth hormone secretagogue somewhere around activity, being fasted cardio, being a workout, or maybe evening cardio, allowing you to take care of some of these free-form fatty acids and the elevated glucose concentrations, not having a negative effect on your insulin sensitivity. And that's one of the reasons why I always tell everybody, listen, if you take a growth hormone secretagogue or exogenous growth hormone, do some activity first, so you're reducing or mitigating completely this acute effect that you have on your insulin sensitivity by taking care of this elevated free-form fatty acids or glucose triglycerides in your bloodstream. So that's one way around it. And keep in mind that there's two kinds of growth hormone secretagogues, mimicking the natural pathway of the hypothalamic-Pituitary-Somatotropic-Axis, requiring a growth hormone releasing hormone and a Ghrelin, or an agonist of these hormones, to secrete the most amount of growth hormone without the negative feedback of IGF-1. Step 1 is reducing IGF-1 concentrations, although growth hormone secretion will still occur, albeit to a little bit lesser extent, when you take a growth hormone secretagogue. So you're going to have to combine two drugs, that being a growth hormone releasing hormone receptor agonist and a Ghrelin receptor agonist. So you might have to combine CJC1295 with or without DAC with GHRP6, or combine a sermorelin with an ipamorelin, or combine tesamorelin with MK677, right? These compounds work on different receptors which enhance each other's effect. Now, you can take MK677 and still get good results, or you can take sermorelin and still get good results, because they're both activating one of these receptors. But a combination of both usually yields in higher growth hormone concentrations. And again, if you want to save a little bit of money, you want to get the most bang for your buck for the amount of money that you're spending on a growth hormone secretagogue over the weekend, right? To save a little bit of money, but still get the benefits of elevated growth hormone and IGF-1 concentrations beyond what you're producing naturally, unless you're fasting. And again, well, you need a little bit of food intake to build muscle tissue. You can't fast indefinitely just for those elevated GH and IGF-1 levels. I would go, keeping insulin resistance in mind, I would go with a combination of CJC, no DAC, with ipamorelin, or combination of sermorelin with ipamorelin. Many of the compounding pharmacies in the United States produce these combinations. So you only have to do one administration, considering it's already compounded in a single vial, usually in comparable dosages or ideal dosages where you can get the most amount of growth hormone secretion. You run that maybe 2 times, 3 times per day on the days that you're not taking exogenous growth hormone, which should be significantly cheaper compared to running anywhere over 2 to 3 units of exogenous growth hormone, especially pharmaceutical grade. Now, will you still spend money? Obviously. But you'll spend significantly less compared to the exogenous growth hormone if it's pharmaceutical. It might be cheaper, honestly, if you're doing 3 injections of a CJC no DAC and a GHRP6 or ipamorelin combination 3 times per day to get the most amount of growth hormone release. It might be cheaper to just run a little bit of Chinese generics, which many guys do. They run pharmaceutical grade in the weekend or during the week, Monday to Friday, and then the same amount of growth hormone in the weekend being Chinese generics, right? It's another way to be a little bit more cost effective regarding your growth hormone use. But there's still only so much growth hormone you're able to secrete, no matter how hungry you go or how much you blunt your IGF-1 levels with metformin from Friday, Saturday to Sunday. Plus, let's be honest, in the weekend you're going to be eating a little bit more, so the influx of calories is a little bit higher anyway. So you really have to time your injections, being in the morning before fasted cardio, in the afternoon before the workouts, ideally when your food has already been digested a little bit, and somatostatin levels have already come down to baseline. And then before bed on an empty stomach as well. There should not be any carbohydrates in your system. So a little bit difficult in the evening, in the weekend, when on Saturday and Sunday, usually the food choices are a little bit more luxurious. So how about we switch those 2 days off to Thursday and Friday? And now that we're eating a little bit better on Thursday and Friday, assuming that everybody's following a similar food strategy where you have your cheat meal over the weekend and during the week your diet is squeaky clean and you prepare all your meals and your calories are calculated and you're doing your fasted cardio to help with insulin sensitivity. You put everything in place like the fish oil with each meal and the magnesium with each meal and the carnitine with each meal and the apple cider vinegar with each meal to help with the absorption of the free-form fatty acids and the triglycerides and the glucose and improve insulin sensitivity. You're doing all these things, then it's better to do a growth hormone secretagogue on Thursday and Friday so you can eat something in the weekend and then rely on the exogenous growth hormone, which is going to raise your IGF-1 levels, but not have a long-lasting effect regarding insulin sensitivity issues or cause insulin resistance outside of what you're doing to mitigate that with activity. Right? Because you're not going to inject growth hormone before you go out for a cheat meal. Now, you're going to use growth hormone before fasted cardio or before the workout or after the workout. Right? We're doing our best to mitigate this acute insulin resistance which occurs with a growth hormone, exogenous growth hormone injection or an injection of a growth hormone secretagogue. For budgeting purposes, this is probably the best way going forward. Thursday and Friday, you use a growth hormone secretagogue 3 times per day, a growth hormone secretagogue that gives you the most amount of growth hormone secretion for the amount of money that you're spending. And this is a little bit of research that you need to do by yourself because, well, unfortunately, everybody responds a little bit differently. So some guys respond very well to a combination of CJC no DAC with ipamorelin or sermorelin with ipamorelin. And the next guy responds better to CJC with DAC and GHRP6, right? So this is something, a little bit of research and experimentation that you need to do by yourself. And well, the peptide sites usually sell these growth hormone secretagogues by the vial. So maybe you buy vials of all the growth hormone secretagogues, but just one. And you run the experiment and keep a little bit of a log to see which peptide you respond to best. And then you have to outweigh, let's say you rank them. Oh, this one I respond very well to, but the second one I respond to a little bit less. But if I increase the dose a little bit more, I'm still spending half of what I'm spending on the growth hormone secretagogue, which is ranked first in my experimentation process. Right? Cost effective, that's always a determining factor. Not only the most efficacious one, but the most efficacious for the amount of money that you're spending on it, unless you're getting sponsored, and then it's no real issue, of course. So that's something I would like to propose for the guys that are trying to save a little bit of money and are potentially worried about their hypothalamic-Pituitary-Somatotropic-Axis, which just take 2 days off of growth hormone and your growth hormone secretion will pick back up once these negative feedback of the IGF-1 and potentially frequent meals, which is very common in bodybuilding, right, kind of wears off. And now you get normal growth hormone levels again. It's not like you need to do a post-growth hormone therapy with a growth hormone secretagogue afterwards. Natural secretion will pick back up as long as you don't send the signal for further inhibition or negative feedback. One last thing we can consider is MK677, which is a little bit tricky because it increases insulin resistance the most out of all the growth hormone secretagogues because it keeps growth hormone elevated, which then cascades into this free-form fatty acids all day, which then over time builds up into pretty hefty insulin resistance. And when you take MK677 during a cutting phase, when you're not eating so much food and you're doing cardio actively and you're restricting calories, this insulin resistance issue is not really occurring. But if you're taking MK677 during the off-season, the increase of fasting glucose concentrations might happen within a few days already. And considering that MK677 elevates growth hormone and IGF-1 levels after dosing for about 24 hours, you might want to take that Wednesday evening already. Considering you're going to be off exogenous growth hormone on Thursday and Friday, that have a negative effect of the growth hormone secretagogue regarding your insulin sensitivity on the days that you're going to be eating off the diet. You might want to do the MK677 Wednesday evening and Thursday evening because most of the growth hormone secretion and the elevated IGF-1 levels concurrently and the potential for insulin resistance during those 2 days are then on the 2 days that you're the most depleted. But this way, by dosing the MK677 earlier, you have the most amount of growth hormone secretion following the moment where exogenous growth hormone has metabolized. So Wednesday afternoon, the exogenous growth hormone has already been utilized, even though IGF-1 levels have been increased. The MK677 that you now take before bed in the evening on Wednesday should raise growth hormone concentrations the next day. And then the MK677 you take Thursday evening raises growth hormone and IGF-1 levels on Friday. By the time Saturday runs around, the potential for insulin resistance has now already been mitigated by doing activity on Friday and by doing a fasted cardio Saturday morning, allowing for another growth hormone administration, which will then be metabolized and insulin resistance acutely has been resolved by the time you have your cheat meal. So the timing of these exogenous growth hormone and growth hormone secretagogues is crucial if you want to do this kind of a protocol for budget purposes, but you should be able to get very, very good results while keeping the costs down quite significantly. But again, if you're simply looking at the results, it's certainly better just to continue with the growth hormone every day of the week, because any dose over 2 IUs GH per day is probably already super physiological. Right? There's only so much growth hormone you can produce with a growth hormone secretagogue. And again, considering the acute insulin resistance of an MK677, you're also inhibiting a little bit of the nutrient partitioning. So all these things you have to consider if you're looking for the most amount of hyperplasia, recovery, productivity regarding your bodybuilding aspirations. There's no days off when it comes to growth hormone. But if you want to save a little bit of money, maybe some of these things that we discussed in this video will set you back less compared to running growth hormone all the way through. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope it was helpful. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigoroussteve.com/shop. Personalized advice always available through consultations. You can find the rates in the consultations section. Follow me on Instagram @VigorousSteve. Have a look at my link tree down below in the description section here on YouTube or in the bio of my Instagram, with links to all the affiliates that I'm associated with, plus discount codes for 5%, 10%, even 15% off. Also links to the Podbean and Spotify, so you can listen to all of these videos instead in audio format, save a little bit of bandwidth on your mobile phone in case you're on a 4G, 5G connection. If you're on Wi-Fi, you can just watch these videos here on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Links to interviews I've done with other YouTube channels. They're all in my link tree. And of course, to the website and how you can contact me directly. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. Front double bicep for you guys. Thank you so much for all of your likes, comments, and all of your support. If you're not part of the Vigorous crew yet, all you need to do is subscribe. You already automatically qualify to be a part of the Vigorous crew. All of your likes and comments, highly appreciated. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys in the next video.